All right, I want to see what Andrew is watching tonight. We do have some questions coming in on the text board for Andrew as well, 609-403-0973. If you have a question for Andrew about tonight's game, the roster makeup, anything like that. And Andrew, obviously those joint practices this week, just the one with Indianapolis, this will be the final kind of on-field full speed type of thing that you'll get to see tonight. So we'll take a look at some of the guys that you have an eye on tonight in the game over at InsideTheBirds.com. You can check out Andrew's piece on that. A couple guys that you'll be watching closely tonight as we bring Andrew DiCecco in to the show. What's going on, buddy? How are you?
What's happening? Hey, Mike, what's happening? Just sitting in the lot outside the link, heading in after this.
Getting ready for the game tonight. And let's take a couple ganders at some of the guys that you have some interest in tonight's game. Let's start with the running back spot here. And everybody kind of realizes, all right, Gainwell, Swift, we're assuming Penny. And then after that, how about this Trey Sermon story tonight? What are you looking for out of him? He had a pretty interesting game the other night against the Browns.
Yeah, well, Trey Sermon was a little nicked up earlier this week, but all signs point to him playing tonight. So we'll see what happens. He's certainly going to get the lion's share of the carries mixed in with some Kennedy Brooks, and I imagine Boston Scott got to have, I would imagine, 3 running backs set to play, just given the nature of how the preseason tends to go. You always got to prepare for an injury or anything like that. But I think that Trey Sermon's going to get every opportunity to at least put some good tape out there for 31 other teams. Not sure if he's going to be able to find a spot on this roster, just given how loaded it is. But, I mean, he looks noticeably leaner, quicker, more decisive. They're giving an opportunity to return kicks. Doesn't look overly fluid in that area. But I think that getting that on tape and proving and showing that you can contribute in special teams is really going to help him. I also think he's impressed as a pass blocker. So he's checking off some of the boxes that I had questions going into the offseason.
Andrew, what do you need to see from a guy like Eli Ricks tonight? Is he making a case to make this team, or is he really trying to do something for another roster at this point?
Well, based on my Twitter replies and things I've seen around, obviously Eli Ricks has been the darling of training camp. Looked really good in the first game, albeit against third-teamers and late into the fourth quarter. But I thought that he had a regression last week in a more extensive sample size. So you want to see him be able to rebound. He's going to have a lot of opportunity to play tonight. Mario Goodrich might be out. He had an undisclosed injury on Tuesday, so we'll have to see about that. And you're going to see McKee Garner and a lot of those other young defensive backs as well. So I think that with Ricks, you saw, I mean, he fell down on a couple plays last week. He looked like he had trouble playing the ball a little bit, but I think you can't deny his dynamic traits. But he's very unrefined, and if he does make the roster, I don't think he's in a position right now where he can contribute right away. I think his pathway to the roster would be if the team was maybe a little hesitant about placing him on waivers and worrying about another team maybe snatching him off waivers. But right now, I don't think he's in any position to help. If he needed to play in the regular season, I think that he needs to be a little bit more consistent, and you would like to see that tonight.
Yeah, I know the guy you mentioned, Goodrich, as well. We got some text messages for you concerning him, and people want to know. Let's bring up a question here about him. For Football Fall, I'd like to hear Andrew's take on Mario Goodrich and if he thinks he's better suited to be a backup to off-injured Maddox ahead of a guy like Josiah Scott.
That's a great question, and the answer is yes, I do. I think that Mario Goodrich was one of the players I had highlighted. I really wanted to see him in a more extensive sample size tonight, and I think that he's had a really when you talk about Eli Ricks, Mario Goodrich has had a better camp. He's had the better summer. He offers inside-outside versatility. I think he looks really comfortable in the slot. He played on the outside last summer, really assertive, playing physical, sticky in coverage. He's also was on the first-team kickoff last week, so that speaks to what the team thinks of him. We'll have to see the extent of this injury. It comes at an inopportune time. But I think right now when you look at the injury situation with Maddox over the years, I think it behooves the Eagles to have a backup slot. Obviously, James Bradbury's seen some opportunities, some reps playing the slot, but I think that someone like Goodrich gives you he's 23 years old, player that you can sort of build around for the future, along with guys like Eli Ricks and players like that. The Eagles have done a really good job finding some of these undrafted late-round picks that they can sort of use as building blocks towards the future.
Chris in Millville wants to know who's returning punts this year. That's a kind of a question that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I think it's certainly a fair question.
Yeah, I love this question, and this is one that I've gotten asked ever since the Britton Covey injury, and it's sort of been lingering with the hamstring. But I honestly think that Britton Covey right now has the inside track, being the incumbent, knowing that there hasn't really been anybody that's pushed him in camp. You've seen a lot of different guys get opportunities to do that. Zach McPherson, unfortunately, we know what happened there. I thought that he was an interesting player in that regard. I thought he could maybe contribute there. Olamide Zaccheaus, if anyone wants a name, is a player that I think could adequately step in and do that. He hasn't done it a ton at the pro level, but I think that he looks comfortable doing it. I think he offers some burst and some short area quickness that can help there, and you really would essentially add an extra roster spot because he's going to play receiver, and you can maybe get yourself a fifth receiver who's more of a bigger body possession type of guy that can help out as an actual receiver. Covey isn't really equipped to do that, at least right now. So I want to see if Zaccheaus plays tonight. I would like to see him get some opportunities. It's also interesting, and this is obviously a long shot, but they signed Freddie Swain, formerly a sixth-round pick of the Seattle Seahawks back in 2020, played football with Tyree Cleveland in Florida, played with offensive coordinator Brian Johnson, who was the quarterback's coach there, has some background returning, so I would expect that he's going to get a long look there tonight. Obviously a long shot, potentially a practice squad stash there, but I think Olamide Zaccheaus, if you're looking at someone outside of Britton Covey.
Andrew DiCecco, Football 4. Let me get your thoughts on where Patrick Johnson fits in. Obviously, that group of guys I think are very interesting to kind of talk about because you got special teams possibilities, but they don't. The fans generally don't think they factor into the defense all that much. But what about a guy like Patrick Johnson tonight?
Yeah, Patrick Johnson's not exactly a household name, but he is somebody that the Eagles hold in high regard, right? He's played in 33 games, 2 starts over the past 2 seasons. He's been a mainstay on special teams, which obviously it could certainly use a familiar face given that they've just lost the nucleus in Sean Bradley and Zach McPherson. So that certainly bodes well in his roster chances. He's stepped in and played over 300 snaps on defense. That's not really what he would be on the roster for, but I think that he's a dependable, reliable player who, when he's been called upon, has been able to step in and carry out his assignments effectively. So he would be somebody that I would be more equipped. I think I'd be more inclined to put him as the final edge rusher over, let's say, a Kyron Johnson, who, let's not forget, the last few games of the season last year, everyone talks about how good he was on special teams, but was actually deactivated for those last few games in favor of, he got really overtaken by Christian Ellis there, whereas Patrick Johnson was a mainstay throughout the season. So I would give the nod there to Patrick Johnson.
We'll look at the guys that Andrew's watching tonight in this final preseason tune-up, I should say. And you wonder, how many guys need this game tonight? How about Josh Sills? I mean, he's a guy that the Eagles obviously liked enough. They stood by him through that situation he had last year. He did not play well the other night, but it's tonight a night that he needs.
Absolutely, and I would think this is a make-or-break game for Josh Sills. Obviously, Sua Opeta is ahead of him right now in that race for the reserve guard position. But, yeah, you talk about how the team has stood by Josh Sills. They plugged him right in with the second team immediately once he was available and eligible to return. But he really hasn't looked, whether it be rust or what have you, he hasn't looked like the player that he looked like last summer when he sort of caught everybody by surprise and made the team as an undrafted free agent. He was actually responsible for that block that ended up resulted in a safety last week. And he just hasn't gotten a lot of push at the line of scrimmage, and that's something to watch tonight. I mean, I think that there's some intriguing traits that he can bring. I think he's a little bit younger than Sua. I think he's possibly a more moldable player when you look at it from a Jeff Stoutland perspective. He doesn't necessarily have a lot of habits that he settled into this early in his career. So that's certainly enticing, but I think that you want to see more out of Josh Sills. Right now, I have him on the outs in favor of Sua Opeta.
All right, interesting there. Another guy I find interesting is Tyree Jackson, just because of his size, athletic ability, what he could possibly be. But, man, he's kind of like a what could have been. The injuries there, does he have a shot to help his chances of making this team tonight, or do you feel like too much of an uphill battle for him?
Well, this certainly feels like a make-or-break year for Tyree. This is his third summer in Philadelphia, and every year he seems to make that push, and he seems to look like he keeps taking the next step in the evolution in his game. And right now, I mean, he's made some nice catches in the preseason. There haven't been many, but I think that you would like to see, be it Tanner McKee or Ian Book, really look to force-feed him the football, because I think that he can be a vertical threat. He can certainly be a red zone presence. He's 6'7", 250, looks noticeably bigger and stronger. So I think when you compare it to a Grant Calcaterra or Dan Arnold, he has immense upside when you compare it to those two. So if he shows anything tonight, you have to wonder if other teams are going to be looking at the Eagles tape, knowing their tight end situation, and say, well, if Jackson doesn't make it, we're going to put in a claim for him because we think we can do something with him, move him around, create mismatches. I don't know that you can do that with a Calcaterra, and certainly not a Dan Arnold, who's now on his fifth team and more of a journeyman type of player. So I think that, at the end of the day, I feel like the Eagles may show deference to a player in which they've drafted and invested a year in Calcaterra, but I think that Tyree Jackson is a really interesting player.
I'm interested to get your take. I know so many people after the preseason game, talking about the backup quarterback, and I know that you probably have some thoughts on Tanner McKee, but what is your take on that position right now? Are you still leaning that, hey, Mariota had a bad night, he's won games in this league, he's a veteran, or do you think this is something the Eagles should have more of an open mind about?
Well, I mean, let's not. I don't want to downplay it. I do think that Mariota has. It's a troubling trend now. It's not just a practice here, a series here. This is a series of inconsistencies, erratic ball placement. He's throwing a lot of passes. He just does not look like he looks like the rookie, and Tanner McKee looks like the veteran type of player. But I think all things equal, knowing how the Eagles operate, Mariota is going to go into the season as the 2. I don't know that they would ever throw a 6th-round rookie into the fire like that. It wouldn't be fair to Tanner and his development, but I think that it would take something drastic, Mike, for the Eagles to pull Mariota and have Tanner McKee leapfrog him or replace him in a game should Jalen Hurts miss any time. I think they're going to give Marcus Mariota the benefit of the doubt, and for what it's worth, you have to think, or at least hope, if you're the Eagles, that the offense would look a lot different if Mariota's throwing to guys like AJ, Devontae, Dallas. But that said, when he has had opportunities to hit guys, he's missed by a wide margin. So that certainly is a little bit troubling, especially coming off the season that he had in Atlanta. But I think right now he's comfortably going to be the number 2 moving forward.
Yeah. What is your thoughts on McKee, though? Is he a guy that intrigues you? I mean, what was your thoughts on him entering the draft this year?
Yeah, I like the pick. I question the fit, just knowing that he didn't really fit the prototype in what the Eagles currently have as being a mobile quarterback like Ian Book, like Marcus Mariota, like Jalen Hurts. But I like his arm strength. I like his pocket presence. I thought his skill set was pretty refined, and I thought getting him in the 6th round was a steal if they were able to get him up to speed. I didn't know how quickly he was going to be able to process and grasp what they were going to ask him to do in such a short period of time. But you have to be really impressed with what you've seen from him. And I think that right now he's able to take what he's learned from the preseason, take these live reps, and hopefully build that on that momentum moving forward. But I think if you're the Eagles, you have to probably think that this is a little bit more of his development's a little bit expedited compared to where you maybe thought he'd be at this point.
A couple things I guess everybody wants to watch for tonight, and I don't know if we'll get to see much of it. Do you anticipate seeing safety and that unfolding a little bit tonight, or do you think that safety position is kind of locked in? I mean, a lot of people talk about Justin Evans the last couple days.
Yeah, and that's a position that I'll certainly be keeping an eye on. But you have to, I have to think that the Eagles, they weigh practices heavily, and the joint practices like that. That is first and foremost what they assess, and the preseason obviously comes after that. But Justin Evans has received first-team reps over the past week. Hasn't just been a series. This is starting to build. This is starting to gain some traction here. And early in training camp, it was Kayvon Wallace who got a lot of headlines and got a lot of praise and notoriety for getting the first-team snaps with opposite Reed Blankenship. And you started to wonder is the light finally coming on for Wallace here? But he sort of seems to be falling out of favor a little bit. And really, when you look at what the Eagles have at the safety position right now, at least, they have a lot of players who are very similar in terms of skill set. A lot of box players, a lot of players that aren't necessarily as adept playing in coverage. I think if you had to look at it, Sidney Brown would probably be the most fluid and adept at playing in pass coverage, but that's certainly not his calling card right now. I think that you kind of know what you have in Kayvon Wallace, and to carry five, let's say, would probably five players of the same skill set would be sort of malpractice. So I'm kind of starting to wonder if Kayvon Wallace is on the outs as we approach the final preseason game.
All right, keep an eye on that. Corner we touched on earlier, and that's still up for grabs a little bit there, spots at the corner position. And then linebacker, is that locked up in your mind?
Yeah, the way I see it right now, and I think Zach Cunningham, he's got that spot opposite Nakobe Dean locked in. Then it's Christian Ellis. Then you wonder what becomes of Nicholas Morrow, right? I'm going to be keeping an eye on, is he a factor on special teams? Because right now he's the fourth linebacker. When you look at it from that perspective, Ben Van Sumeren has really taken on a pretty prominent special teams role in the preseason. Now, do I think he's a viable candidate for the 53? I don't know. I think he's more of a practice squad player that you can maybe elevate on game day and then eventually sign, kind of like what they did with Britton Covey last year. But I don't know where Morrow fits in. If he's not starting and he's not being a core special teams member, where does he fit? So I have the top three slotted, and then that might be it. You might stash a couple on the practice squad and maybe promote on game day. But I don't know that Morrow really factors into the equation. We'll have to see if tonight changes my mind.
Interesting there. And, of course, the team brought back Fred Johnson. It looks like that means he's going to make the team there. So things are starting to come into fruition ahead of Tuesday, the 29th. That is the final cutdown day. But, Andrew, as we know, just because they cut down to 53 on Tuesday, that roster could still be taking a lot of shape between now and kickoff next 2 Sundays from now. Really, is it 2 or 3 Sundays from now, actually?
Well, I anticipate that the initial 53 is extremely fluid. So that's good that you remind folks that it's like that. Just because that's what's announced at 4:00 on Tuesday doesn't necessarily mean that's what they're taking with them to New England on September 10th. It's certainly a very fluid situation.
All right, Andrew DiCecco is at Lincoln Financial Field tonight. You can hear the game right here on 97.3 ESPN, and that's at 7 o'clock with the coverage. Andrew DiCecco on Twitter. Give him a follow there. Staff reporter and content producer, of course, for our partners over at InsideTheBirds.com. And he will be live at Lincoln Financial Field with info and analysis from the Eagles and the Colts tonight. Andrew, all right, buddy. Appreciate you.
Yeah, no doubt. Talk next week.
All right, Andrew DiCecco, everybody, here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and brought to you by the Gallery Bar, Book, and Games at Ocean Casino Resort. Go to the Gallery, go to Ocean, go for the win. For more info, visit oceanac.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.